Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Leveraging Lessons from the Past webinar, Case Studies in Laboratory Safety. This is Jenna Peterson, a Senior Education Specialist for Mayo Clinic Laboratories. Our presenter today is Jill Hill, a Safety Program Coordinator in the Department of Laboratory Medicine and Pathology at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. A couple of things to remind everyone of before we start today. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the program. You can submit questions online via the Q&A icon in Zoom. Please only use the chat function for any technical issues. Also, today's program is being recorded and will be posted to our website in a few weeks. And now I'll turn things over to our presenter.
Thanks, Jenna. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Jill Hill. I'm here at the Mayo Clinic in sunny Rochester, Minnesota today. I first want to announce that I have no disclosures. And to dig into the learning objectives for today, I will ask that you keep these things in mind as we go along. And if you feel they weren't addressed or not clear, please ask questions as the presentation goes along, and we'll answer those questions at the end. The objectives today, we're going to look at the hierarchy of controls, the cornerstone of safety, look at several different hazards through the case studies I'll be presenting, look at several tools that could help prevent incidents and accidents, and then discuss how an RCA works, why and when we do it, and a few different methods for performing a root cause analysis. So why do we do case studies? Why do we look at these? The takeaway is that stories are a wonderful way to learn, and it's the way teaching has been handed down over generations. But most importantly, we learn from them, even if it wasn't our particular story, and then we could take action to prevent the same stories from being told for generations to come. So an example of this is my husband used to work in food service at an elementary school. He needed hot water for a task, discovered there was no hot water, and so he let his lead know. The lead said, "Oh, don't worry, it takes a while for it to warm up." But it actually got colder. The water got colder. So he could have said, "Well, I did what I was supposed to do," and then bypass the procedure and find another way to get hot water. But instead, he started with the knowledge he had and started to say, I wonder if this is happening elsewhere. Turns out there's no hot water in the entire building. And if he had said nothing, it probably would have taken a lot longer to resolve the issue, to get someone to come out and fix it. And then a lot more people would have been effective. And so would have the corrective action have been timely. So he took that action moving forward, getting the issue resolved. One of the reasons I love him is because he's a problem solver. But all of that to say, does this mean I'm going to tell you another story about hot water? Is it going to improve your safety culture? The answer is no. But hopefully the stories that I share today will get you thinking about situations and going, I wonder if, or what if this happened to me? And before I leave this slide, I just want to emphasize a couple of terms. RCA stands for root cause analysis, and CAPA is corrective and preventive actions. So keep those in the back of your mind as we move forward. I also want to make one disclaimer before we move forward. There is no question, all of you on this call work in clinical laboratories and you recognize there are many hazards. And fortunately, all of you have been rigorously trained. We've got subject matter experts in the labs, myself and other people at your institution. And what I want to emphasize here is that while there are lots of hazards here at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and wherever you are, that the stories I'm sharing today are not being shared to shame or blame anyone. And it's also for the purpose of learning, and that it may or may not have taken place here in Rochester. So here's our first case, the case of the perilous PPE. Here are the facts. A technologist was wearing appropriate PPE, placing cryopreserved canisters containing cryopreservation vials, otherwise known as canes, into vapor phase liquid nitrogen tanks. After they moved that first canister, they changed gloves because their hands felt cold. And remember, these are those thick thermal gloves. The second transfer they were doing required removing several canes from one canister. And I'll show you an image in a sec to demonstrate what I'm talking about. As they were working with this, several canes were stuck together. So they had to manipulate it further to separate them out, to get them into the into the tank, and then noticed getting colder because their hands getting colder because they were holding it longer. 2 fingers began to hurt, ultimately becoming numb, yet they continued working. The next day, that tech's fingertips were red, sensitive to touch and sensitive to cold. And this is what we might call frost nip. And their fingers were tingling and they were unable to work. So, what went wrong here? The thing I want to point out here is that this is a graphical representation of what I described, but graphical I use in quotes because some liquid nitrogen storage tanks can be really huge and challenging to work with. And when we're handling these precious products, time is of the essence to ensure preservation and quality of the product. So I just want to point out again, this person was exposed to extreme cold. The gloves had actually deteriorated a bit, and this can happen. They're not endlessly usable, and the moisture on those panes were problematic. So, what can we take from this? This slide isn't to give you the full workup of the root cause analysis or the kappa. It's an overview of what we learned through the experience. In safety, we always want to keep the hierarchy of controls in mind. So, you're going to see this image several times throughout this presentation. Because the hierarchy of controls are the framework for safety, ultimately to eliminate the hazards we can, but in this case, we can't eliminate the liquid nitrogen storage because that's the best way to preserve cellular products. But we can look at some tools, which we might call the engineering control in this case. So we're not directly handling the canister right away. Administrative controls, that would be putting that cryo hook into the procedure and also looking at the ongoing evaluation of these gloves. We really have to look at PPE in the situation. Despite being at the least effective control method, it's one that we can control the most. So in this case, we have to protect the worker who is at some point inevitably going to touch this very, very cold stuff. And some labs, here at Mayo, we have this, a software solution for quality control and preventive maintenance that could be used to set up a periodic reminder to assess the quality of the gloves. Even if your laboratory is still recording this information on paper, perhaps reusable PPE could be added to that checklist. When we talk about process changes, this could be hard because we know staffing is difficult on a good day. Changing the procedure might involve another person. And again, that can be really challenging, but these are the types of questions we ask in a root cause analysis. Before I go on, sorry, I got ahead of myself. We'll touch on this again later, but what is the cost of this event? Let's say the employee has an underlying condition, and in this case, they did. They have diabetes. So they're out more than a day, they're out more like a week to fully heal. So the cost of that is lost productivity compared to the cost of getting new gloves or several pairs of new gloves. We can see the new gloves are worth it. Also, our employee may not be able to contribute in a meaningful way, and we know when they can't do that, it makes life much harder for them as well as the laboratory. Because we know most of our staff work in healthcare to help other people, so an incident is impactful to the injured employee just as much as the patients they're caring for, just in a different way. All right, the next case, a biological safety cabinet debacle. Here are the facts. During the evening shift, a BSC had been thoroughly cleaned. The alarm was turned off while the sash was raised above its normal level. After cleaning was completed, the blower was turned off. The next day, the BSC was used by a day shift staff member, and they discovered that the MagnaHelic read had not been recorded in the lab's quality control software program. Then they discovered the BSC had been used at that time without the alarm or the blower switched on, and the sash was raised too high to be considered safe. Now what do we do? So let's talk about what went wrong here. We talked about it a little bit on the previous slide, but I've added a few more vital details. Again, we know the alarm was off. It was not turned back on. The SASH was too high. The other information we discovered on day 2 is that the tech working in the BSC was inoculating a plate with specimens known to contain viral particles. This is now a bigger problem because there were people, 8 people to be exact, in the area that may or could have potentially been exposed to the viral particles in those specimens. So what do we learn from this? First of all, kudos to the supervisor. They met with the individual who did the cleaning. They met with every one of the staff who may have been exposed. And depending on those individuals, you as supervisors and leaders in your laboratory, you know these can be very difficult conversations, especially encouraging staff to submit a report if they don't think they were exposed, but also for those people who are a little bit more anxious than others. Those conversations take time away from other work that could be done. And as you know, it takes a lot of patience to answer questions that you as leaders might not have answers for just yet. So if you've ever been in this situation, I commend you because being a supervisor is hard enough, let alone having an incident like this to deal with. In this case, though, the good news is that no one was infected by any organisms or any viruses. While a formal training did exist for the use and maintenance of a BSC, more specific steps were added, and this cleaning, shutdown, and startup became part of the lab's annual competency. So when we look at the hierarchy of controls in this case, again, we can't remove the hazard. We're working with viral particles, can't replace it. The biological safety cabinet itself is the engineering control, but what was really needed here was improved administrative controls. And what I mean by that is changing the way the work was done by updating the procedure, making it part of annual competency, and so on. Something else to consider in the interest of making safety something we do from muscle memory is to revisit this case periodically. Perhaps your team has huddles. Perhaps you do tabletop drills. All of these things take time, so I recognize that it can be challenging to come back to. But paint the picture for your staff. Maybe it wasn't even your work unit where it happened. What would you do if it happened? Ask that question. See what answers crop up. Do the answers align with the procedure if your group does this? If the answers aren't what you expected, celebrate that because maybe it gives you an idea of how to improve the process. It could also give you an idea or a better understanding of the way your team prefers to interact. So again, there's a lot to be taken from this aside from just the potential exposure to infectious organisms. You can really interact with your team in a lot of different ways through investigating this thoroughly. Okay, the last case, the scandalous safety audit. So here's the story. An astute technologist with a keen eye for safety had been informally assessing, not documenting, so that's a little bit of foreshadowing for you. They were assessing the lab's physical environment fairly regularly for a few years. And when they found something, they would bring forward to the supervisor and those issues would be taken care of. So since this person was considered the safety expert, they were asked to complete the safety checklist for the year's annual assessment. Unbeknownst to peers and leaders, they marked yes to items they had actually stopped checking because in the past, those things looked good. Well, you can imagine what happened here. Not long after they completed that checklist, there was a fire. And if any of you have been involved in a fire in a laboratory, they spread quickly. And so you could say it was contained relatively quickly, but really it affected everyone and everything, including the lab on the floor above. So what went wrong is pretty obvious that they missed that frayed wire. The fire department found that. But the fire department investigation also noted remains of damaged ceiling tiles. And so what that tells us is that the path of the spreading fire shows that the damage came before the fire took place, and that likely contributed to the fire spreading to the laboratory on the floor above. So what do we learn from this? Again, we're not going to do the whole root cause and corrective and preventive action in this one slide, but my favorite saying in the laboratory, and I hope you know it too, is that if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. So That frayed electrical cord was probably checked off as yes, all cords are intact. Clearly it wasn't. Obviously, we want to correct safety issues as soon as we possibly can. Um, as supervisor, again, one of the hardest jobs, this includes helping you do your job safely. And I know the supervisors here at Mayo will take you seriously when you bring a problem forward. But if you, as the doer of the checklist, you overlook something or do what we call pencil whip, that puts everyone at risk. So we never want to answer a safety checklist or any checklist by just saying yes to something when you haven't truly checked it. This is one of our Mayo Clinic values of integrity, and I hope you all embrace that. The best way to capture these types of checks are not necessarily the same for everyone. Perhaps you leverage the same type of software we talked about in the first case, where you're documenting periodic maintenance and quality control. Could you include certain aspects of your physical environment there with different items being addressed throughout the year? Could you bring a physical environment checklist to a huddle and assign different items to staff? Could there be a reward or positive reinforcement when all the items have been reviewed? There is no one right answer for this. You all know your work groups, and getting everyone together at the same time is challenging. A quality report, not necessarily seen by everyone. Huddles, again, challenging to stop work, but I firmly believe it's worth it. But at the very least, continue to tell the story, even if it's not your story, so that others can learn from it. So again, why am I sharing these? As I stated previously, we remember, we learn from stories, and we learn from mistakes. And what's important is what we do after the mistake has been made. I've included a couple articles here that you can access. They're a couple years old now, but they are still worthwhile. This article from Inc.com is really great if you're thinking in the context of business, and it speaks to the technological precursors of today's iPhone and Amazon Echo. And what I really took from this article is that we learn from our mistakes, and it's where I snuck in the statement earlier. If I didn't say it, I don't remember saying it, but words don't fix problems, actions do. And I know for all of you listening, this is not easy, but I do know we'll find opportunities in the mistakes. The second link is a great article about event investigations, and we'll touch on this more in the next few slides. Can we determine the cost with these cases? Again, I touched on this briefly with the case with the liquid nitrogen tanks for that worn out PPE event. You know, generally that type of injury is not too severe, but this person had the underlying condition of diabetes, which slows healing. And so we lost a full week of work for this individual, affecting both lab productivity and that employee's morale by not being able to do what they were trained and enjoy doing. For the BSC debacle, there were 9 separate employee incident reports. The supervisor met with every one of those employees, had to do their part on the report, and then updated procedures and retraining. So what we're looking at there is potential overtime for rewriting the updates to procedures and adding it to competency, and the required time for the supervisor to meet with everyone is very, very important, and also takes away from doing that patient-centered work that we're known for here. And by far the worst case was the fire in the lab. This laboratory had an annual volume of 1 million tests per year until that fire took place. Over 100 employees were impacted in some way. And when I say impacted, the impacts run the gamut. Some were exposed to smoke, some needed time away from work to recover from that, or simply from the stress of what took place. Some were redeployed to different work areas to continue working, but in a space that they maybe did not enjoy or want to be in because they were missing their regular work. The list goes on. All of this to say, we spend a lot of time and resources on incidents. Ergonomics is something I didn't mention at all today, but I can imagine you already know these injuries are among the worst because of the time away or restrictions that are put in place. This is why a root cause analysis helps us work backwards and ask, what if we had processes in place? And what could those processes be so these things don't occur to begin with? A few questions came in prior to the webinar from some of you that registered about compliance and employee buy-in. And so I wanted to offer some suggestions. First and foremost, if you're that person in the role of safety officer or you're known as the safety person, you have got to maintain persistent positivity. And that doesn't mean everything is all good all the time. It's a term I learned from another safety expert in the field. And essentially, what it means is you can't give up on the cause of keeping your staff safe. It can be tempting to take your foot off the gas when things are going well. It's important to actually continue to accelerate. What that might look like is encouraging your teams to incorporate safety training early and often and with as much hands-on opportunity as you can. Your leadership teams, the administrators, the people in charge, obviously you need them to be on the same page. I know that's hard and not always the case, but to give you some hope, what we have seen is that when our leaders speak out about safety and share the why behind things, it is so, so helpful. Also, when we have measurable data that staff can see, this is very helpful. Over the last few years, we've had varying initiatives at the front line to measure compliance with things like safety glasses or wearing the appropriate shoes, right up there with the metrics for quality control and other important items like proficiency testing or run failures. I will always refer back to the hierarchy of controls as our gold standard approach for a safer working environment. And at the same time, we have to get to know our staff, find those safety champions, even if it's not a formal role, and personalize training as best we can to meet their needs and build that confidence, which encourages both safer techniques at all steps and a willingness to report accidents, incidents, and near misses. Okay, root cause analysis. Let's switch gears a little bit and start out with what is it exactly? It's structured, and most importantly, it focuses on processes, not people. Certainly, there were people involved, but more than likely, there was something wrong with the process that caused these events to happen. It's a means to determine what our corrective action and preventive action is. It uses open and honest communication with decisions made on data and facts. And it allows us to see that there may be multiple solutions to a problem. So, to be clear, none of the people in these cases were blamed or shamed for what occurred, but obviously, challenging conversations had to take place to gather the information needed to prevent the incidents from occurring again. So, that's the what. How about the why? I would love to say that the only reason we do RCAs is to make things better and safer so that bad things don't happen again. For better or worse, there are laboratorians out there that believe that the way we've always done things is the best we can do. Fortunately, we have some accreditation and regulatory bodies that require us to believe improvements are possible. So please don't consider the requirements that you have to maintain a burden. Consider them a tool and a help to push forward having corrective actions. Speaking of which, this image is taken from the College of American Pathologists Laboratory General Checklist. If you recognize this emblem for Discover, you know it is the D as in dog. For Discover, the last part of an inspector's steps in doing a thorough inspection of a laboratory. Obviously, corrective action is listed there specifically for any occupational injury or illness, especially that required medical treatment. The checklist items I have listed below are a few that have the words corrective actions embedded in them, which are mostly addressed by the completion of a root cause analysis. If your laboratory performs testing for the state of New York, regardless of being inside the state or away from the state, they too look for procedures and documentation of root cause analysis. They also ask to see whether or not your corrective and preventive actions are effective. That's really where it's at, is what you planned to do to prevent really doing its job. So how do we do a root cause analysis? There are several ways. This is just a very short list of the ways you can go about it, and greater detail and the how-tos of it can be found in different resources that we have. There are lab-related journals, lab-related articles, and even industrial literature. But at a very high level, just as an overview. The 5 whys is one I use often when we talk about employee safety incidents, especially where the event seems pretty straightforward and maybe procedural driven. But when a situation is more complex, you might start with brainstorming and pair it with a fishbone diagram to ensure you're gathering all the information required to have effective and corrective preventive actions. The method that you choose may be based on the severity or complexity of the issue at hand, or you may engage more than one method, depending on the types of thinkers in your group. The takeaway from this is that there are lots of ways to do it, but at the end of it all, the focus should be on what went wrong, not who went wrong. So when do we do this? The easy answer would be anytime there's a non-conforming event. The longer answer, and probably more appropriate, is that it depends. So this image on this slide is a risk assessment matrix, and you can apply it to lots of different things. If your laboratory has an IQCP in place, you may have already used this kind of matrix with a number attached to score the level of likelihood and consequence. So this is just one tool to help you objectively determine when it should be done, because again, we want to do a root cause analysis based on data and facts. Sometimes, though, in a big organization like Mayo, which I'll talk about more on the next slide, where I'm the safety coordinator for a large group, I can see from the outside how different scenarios may require an RCA. And sometimes, not going to lie, people disagree with that. And that's why the data sharing and the storytelling is so important. So we all learn about what happened elsewhere and consider the impact it has on our individual work area. So let's say I've told a story about a box cutter at a safety committee meeting. The story gets shared with the individual work areas who are on the committee, including the corrective and preventive actions. Then the incident happens again in a different work area. And they say, it's just once, we're fine. And that's my opportunity to say, hey, actually, this has happened before. Do you remember me talking about it? And it comes back to that patient and pleasant persistence. I'm not here to call anyone out and say, you should have prepared, you should have gotten the different box cutter. I'm here to say, let's visit about what happened with that other group and what they did and see if it might work for you based on what happened here. Maybe that other group's corrective and preventive action has no place and no chance of working in this new space. But now we've got a dialogue of what might work in the new space. I'm sharing this slide with you. Some of you may have seen it before, and it's for the purpose of perspective. Mayo Clinic Labs performs a ton of tests and has a team of over 3,000 employees dedicated to lab activities. We fully recognize that smaller hospitals and clinics have different testing methods, menus, and certainly fewer staff members to manage similar tasks. By no means have we reached safety culture nirvana here at Mayo. My goal in sharing this with you is to let you know that you are not alone when you face the challenges of managing employee safety incidents. The fact that those of you are here today listening to this tells me how much you care about those around you. So job well done for coming to this. What do I want you to take away from this? If I can leave you with anything, it's these 3 items. Investigate an event as soon as you can. If you don't have a safety officer, just start grabbing the data and the information as quickly as you can. Using the root cause analysis methods, or perhaps others, you will find that you are really getting to the root of the problem. Remember, you've got folks who may be afraid to speak up. Be creative in how you gather their feedback of the event, but think about the cost of what has gone wrong and the cost of poor training. Most importantly is the 3rd bullet, to follow through. Share these events with as many people as you can, especially the lessons learned and what was put in place to improve the process. Update your documents, of course, and your analytical procedures, but train again, and then ask the questions. You want to establish muscle memory for what to do. And finally, ask what if. If any of you out there have children, maybe you're sick of this question, But as an adult, I don't think we do it enough. And that's where we can potentially improve things if we ask those questions that might be a little bit different. Some resources that I wanted to share with you because they've helped me. Um, you probably recognize many of these acronyms, but I do want to point out that the CDC has a book called the Biosafety and Microbiological and Biomedical Laboratories. It's updated every few years and has valuable information on laboratory biosafety. So, as an example, I could have gone to that resource with the biological safety cabinet debacle to determine what I should do in the future to make sure everyone is safe. It's a great resource. Couple of names on here, maybe some of you recognize who are interested in safety. Sean Kaufman, he is the owner of a company called Safer Behaviors, and he is the reason I can use the words persistently pleasant because he has talked about that time and again. He is a biosafety expert. He has a lot of really useful information on the people part of safety because that is really where it's at in making improvements. And certainly, last but not least, Dan Scungio. If you are on this call and from Mayo, you know that I love his webinars and promote his webinars, but he and Sean have a podcast together. And I can't say enough good things about what I have learned from his teaching. And finally, thank you all for taking time out of your very busy schedules today to attend. I will look to my colleagues online to see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Jill. At this time, we would like to invite you to submit any questions that you might have, and you can submit those questions through the Q&A icon in Zoom. So we do have some time, so please be thinking of your questions if there's anything that you would like Jill to touch on further.
So someone commented, both Dan and Sean are fantastic. Sean's webinars and classes and amazing, and I've learned so much from him. Absolutely agree with you. This year, and I believe the year before, Sean partnered with APHL, which is one of the organizations I listed on the resource slide, to provide an 8-session series on biosafety. We meet once a month, I think, and there's a quiz and an evaluation, and it is just so valuable to hear from one of the experts, and it was free. So there are resources out there that don't cost that can be helpful to you.
We'll give it a couple minutes. If anyone else has questions they would like to submit, please feel free to do so.
Thank you from Vipul, who said, I truly enjoyed this webinar with real life examples. Yes, the real stories really make a difference and really stick with you. Someone asked, what have you found to be the most helpful to encourage engagement among all lab staff in regard to safety? A few things. I don't know if any one is particularly helpful above another, but having your leaders come to the laboratory and see if you've posted the data about, for example, compliance with appropriate footwear or compliance with safety glasses, and they have the opportunity to commend that. Who doesn't love a pat on the back or a job well done? That is really helpful. The other thing is anytime you can do a tabletop exercise that engages people to really slowly and carefully, without stress, step through a situation that could happen. So here's an example of that. You have remote workers and you have on-site workers, and it varies day to day who is where. And you have to evacuate your space. How do you account for the people when you're not sure who was here and who wasn't? And I'm not saying that because I have an answer to it, but if you walk through a tabletop drill, perhaps you'll come up with a solution that makes sense and doesn't increase the risk for the people on site should you have to evacuate. All in all, I think continuing to bring up safety is so important. It shouldn't be a bottom of the line item when you're at huddles or lab meetings. We have a list of over 50 safety topics that you can cover in 5 minutes at huddles and lab meetings, and some people use them once a week throughout the year and then go back and repeat. Other people have presented cases at huddles where you can work on it in groups of 2 or 3 and then bring it back a different day. There's lots of techniques, but I think the most important thing is in relationship with people, talking, doing together. There's a question from Kathy. I read a headline recently about what you would do if an Ebola patient checked into your hospital. How often do you have employees check their PPE, such as PAPRs or other critical equipment? Excellent question. Very likely to happen anywhere in any of our hospitals. We are very fortunate here at Mayo in Rochester. We have what's called a high consequence infectious disease laboratory. It is supported at the institutional level. So we have a nursing specialist who trains those from lab and those from nursing on the appropriate PPE to be worn, and then annually doing fit checks for respirators, but PAPRs are an easy just-in-time training to do. The other thing you want to keep in mind is that if you are a high quality laboratory using standard precautions of lab coat, gloves, safety glasses, and then a face shield if you're manipulating specimens on the open bench top, if you are using good technique and if you are using all your PPE appropriately, the risk of exposure to something even as bad as Ebola is very, very small because you've got all the safeguards in place. When things happen, like you're rushed or you're careless or trying to move too fast and splashes occur and you don't have that PPE, that's when that's a problem. That list of 50 safety topics is an Excel spreadsheet that I have. So if you want to reach out to mcleducation@mayo.edu, I'm happy to share that with you because it's nothing proprietary. It is just a list of things. For example, what is race? What is pass? And those are easy to say, but what about where do you go? What do you do? What are your responsibilities? Where's your nearest severe weather shelter? What would you do if you spilled 5 molar sulfuric acid? So it's just all over the map of all things safety. For PPE, can you please clarify requirements for footwear in the laboratory? So in the clinical laboratory, what we require is a closed toe impervious shoe that completely covers the foot and the heel and all parts of your feet. And I know this has been a point of contention for lots because some may say, well, I work in an area and I have no corrosives, or I work in an area and I have no sharps. In a place as big as Mayo Clinic, with one giant department of 3,000 people, it is very difficult to have expectations that are different between work units. In the event of a transfer or as during COVID, a redeployment, we had staff working in areas that they were not accustomed to. And so just making sure it's the same across the board as far as impervious, completely close the heel and completely covers the feet and does not have, cannot be penetrated by sharps and is a bit more robust like leather to be resistant to corrosives. So a question, not a question, but an observation. I just completed the safety audit at our lab for the first time, and there were times I had to reach out for help with the regional safety officer on some things I was previously unaware of. Hearing that one of these real life examples comes from a safety audit was very unexpected, but great to know. I cannot believe yes was checked because previously they were good. Thanks for the example. Yeah, you're welcome. It's hard in the safety role to ask more of supervisors and teams that are already doing so much. And my hope is that my colleagues understand that I asked for these things in the effort to keep everybody safe, and that having checked all these boxes doesn't mean accidents aren't going to happen, but it means we've looked at those things that could create risk and have mitigated the risk as best we can. The other survey that we send out in addition to safety audits is an annual ergonomic assessment. And again, it's time consuming, but it's part of that relationship building with your staff. How are you doing? What do you need? And I can't emphasize ergonomic training enough that if it's done more at the beginning, I think we'll see fewer repetitive motion injuries. How do you handle cell phone use in the lab concerning safety? Personally, from a safety standpoint, I hate cell phones in the laboratory. There was recently an article in Laboratory Manager about the risks of having cell phones in the lab, the least of which was contamination, the worst of which is it gets on fire and you have a lithium ion battery, which you can't exactly extinguish. All of that to say, here at Mayo, we have taken a risk-based approach. And so, depending on the work unit that you're in, we look at the risk of having that either in your pocket or in your hand or in certain places, recognizing that these are ubiquitous. And my vote would be to get them completely out of the laboratory. And I recognize that not all laboratories are the same. So it's a challenge for sure. There's a question, is your safety training online or in person? Primarily online for new employees. All of those modules capture electronically that the course has been completed. I really rely on the frontline staff to do more real life safety training for our new staff. So for example, if you're new to the building and new to a lab, someone from the laboratory is going to walk you around and point out the fire exits, where you muster for severe weather, and that type of thing at the lab level. How long do you have to store safety and ergonomic assessment documents for? I'll have to look that up. If you want to email the address on the slide, I can get in touch with you with what that requirement is. Another question is ANSI states duration of activation. During the weekly test, the shower should be activated and allowed to run for at least 15 minutes to ensure proper water flow and that the equipment is functioning correctly. Most drains cannot handle volume of water. What is your recommendation? My first recommendation is to don't think about the drains because we don't want contaminated water going into the sewer, especially if you've been hit by a corrosive or something like that. Here at Mayo, again, we're a large facility with a lot of resources. Our facility staff takes care of this, and I believe they have an enormous bucket for testing. But in the real world, it's you may have a giant mess on your hands, and yeah, hopefully you don't have a drain in the floor though if you have a corrosive or something else that shouldn't be in the sewer.
All right, I'm not seeing any further questions, so I will go ahead and wrap us up. We want to thank you all for participating in today's Leveraging Lessons from the Past webinar, Case Studies in Laboratory Safety. If your question was not answered, or if you have additional questions that you think of, please include them in your evaluation. You may reference the link in the chat now to that evaluation, and that evaluation will be live at noon Central Time today. Laboratory credit is extended for this program, and upon finalizing your evaluation, you will have the option to claim credit and print your certificate. If you registered for the webinar and joined by phone only, please email us at mcleducation@mayo.edu if you do not receive the evaluation link. And as a reminder, this program was recorded and will be archived on our website in a few weeks. Thank you again for joining today's webinar and have a great day.
Thank you for participating. Please click the button below to complete the evaluation and obtain credit.